I'm your host, Micah Versemann, and on today's new episode of the Producer Podcast, it's all about development, as I'm joined by producer and co-author of the book, Greenlight Yourself, Kirk Roos, to discuss the most important phase of any production development. So without further ado, let's get started. Thank you, Kirk, for coming on to the Producer Podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So I've heard a little bit about your background and story from reading the book you helped write, Greenlight Yourself. But to start off, just maybe introduce yourself, how you got into the film industry, and all that.
Yeah, sure. I'm from North Dakota originally, Minot, North Dakota, and I started off in theater. I was doing acting and singing, and I was probably more music based in high school. And growing up, I really cared more about music and wanted to be a musician, and then transitioned into musical theater, and then eventually focused on acting. And I got a, I guess it sort of started. I got a full ride scholarship to go to the University of Louisville for acting. And I had just done a bunch of acting in college, and wasn't quite sure if I wanted to get an MFA at that point, but I went for it. And right in the middle of the first year, I had an opportunity and I took it. And I just drove to LA with no understanding or experience of what I was doing. Got in my Nissan Sentra and just drove across America. And I started it. Here's the problem with acting and then LA versus New York or the Midwest. I was getting uh, acting jobs in the Midwest. I was booking dinner theaters and musicals and children's theater and getting steady work. And I get to LA and I thought, well, okay, I'll pay my bills by doing theater, and then I'll go out for the commercial auditions and TV show auditions and hope for the home run. The problem was there wasn't a lot of paid theater in LA, and I had no idea. This was 1995, 96, 97. So it's not like there was a lot of internet research at that time for something like that. So I learned things the hard way. But as I did some acting in that late 90s, and one thing led to another, and I just shifted into producing. I kind of got lucky a couple times. I don't know if that's the right word because producing is really hard and I don't like it. Uh, but I started, you know what producing is for me? It's putting people together and managing the team and seeing the vision from development to distribution. And I always thought producers were the money guys. I just
Mhm.
assumed they were some suits that would show up and cut checks. What I learned was I was already producing theater back home. It's selling tickets and telling people what show we're going to do next and putting the cast together and building sets and just all of that, really just making it happen. And so some of my actor friends and I would get together and maybe do a short film or we just had a lot of dreams and aspirations of doing this. This is again late 90s. So it's not like independent film was very popular or even easy. No one was
Mhm.
shooting on an iPhone yet. And so we made a couple shorts as a team, and one thing led to another, and I'm back in North Dakota producing a Lewis and Clark documentary. And there's more to that story. But again, I sort of lucked into it. I realized that everyone wanted to be an actor and a writer.
Mhm.
Everyone wanted to be a director, but you need a producer.
Yes.
And not everyone was volunteering. No one was volunteering for that job. So I think that's how I got into it. And then a lot of that was pitching the idea. So it got back to supply and demand for me. It was like, hey, there's someone that needs something here. They're asking us because we're creative. Can you do this job? And I did the Teddy Roosevelt thing where I just said yes to it and then figured out later how to do it. And that's how I got into producing. And yeah, just started realizing I could have a career that balances creative and business. And I think that's what producing was for me.
So producing, one of the biggest things I run into with people is they're like, what does a producer do? Because there's so many different types of producing titles and things like that. So for you, like, what type of producer or title of producer do you like most commonly kind of work under or as?
Yeah, I see myself as a creative producer because my roots are in storytelling, acting,
Mhm.
theater, writing. I've done a lot of other creative events in my life too, and promotions and publicity. And so to me, producing is the process of turning stories into real life experiences for an audience. Now, that might get a little esoteric or creative, but that is my way of seeing it. Now, when it shows up on the screen, I've had executive producer credits, co-producer credits, line producer one or two times. That's a terrible job. Um, and then the produced by credit. And I think to me that it gets kind of strange to even dissect or differentiate or create definitions for these. They're really credits that filmmakers have invented to give people some sort of title. But if I'm on the creative side of that answer, I am a creative producer. I like finding the script and connecting actors and bringing people together. I'm a writer, so I'm often pitching my own scripts. But as a creative producer, if I see a script that I like that I think I can help develop and get it to an audience, I'm going to option that script. And if I think there's a buyer in the end game, I'm thinking like a business person too. So to me, creative producing is part of that. Um, on the business side of that answer, you have to love both sides. I think it's good for even a creative producer, any producer, you should understand the commerce side of the industry. Who's buying? What are they buying for? What is my movie actually worth? And navigating distribution and sales and revenues and learning all that made me a better creative producer because I might have what I think is the coolest, best script ever, only to find out that there's a very limited audience for that and no one wants to pay for it. So now you have to make this decision. Should I make the film that I want creatively, or should I make the one that's going to pay my bills?
Mhm.
And can you balance the two? I think in my career, that's probably been about a 70-30 balance. 70% of the time, I'm probably working on someone else's project
Mhm.
that I've been hired to come on and produce. And maybe there's a client involved or a sponsor, or back in the ad agency days, maybe there was a marketing position or a client in that. But 30% of the time, I've been working on things where it's purely my creative passion driving it. And that's where I'm happy, but that's also where you go for broke. Like that's sink or swim. So I love it over there, but I've balanced out my career by making sure I can pay my bills. And I think that's where you got to sharpen the skills beyond acting and writing and directing and learn the business side of producing.
I would say I'm probably about the same, at least 70% or so is more just stuff to pay the bills, and then the other little bit is the more creative.
Yeah,
Um,
selfies happen when you're on your creative projects, and then when you're not, you're like, I just bury myself in a closet somewhere.
for you then, like, how did you go about learning more of that business side that you mentioned so that you can figure those things out and be more sure?
Yeah, there was some trial and error at first in terms of producing films. Uh, but I had a background in some business. I grew up working in my uncle's music stores, and I understood selling pianos, for example, or what was the cost of marketing and sales and overhead and W-2s or whatever. And then what was the actual cost that we paid for that piano? And then what was the retail cost? And why did we have to meet somewhere in the middle? You know, someone comes in and they try to buy a piano, they're trying to get a good deal or they're trying to do a trade-in. Just learning those simple things, you see the margins and it's no wonder people have to get a certain price. Same
Hmm.
with car dealerships. So I started learning some of that. And then later, when I was in LA, uh, working as an actor and in between jobs, which big gaps of in between, by the way, I started my own antique delivery service. I called it Wake Up Kirk, 24-hour delivery service. And that was that came from my understanding of moving pianos for my uncles and delivering them and customer service. And I could make more in a day doing that job than I could in a week at another job. And so back to producing, I was taking some of my learned business skills from other jobs that I had, and I was also borrowing from my theater days when in college, a lot of times, even if you were an acting or music major, you would still learn things about box office and ticket sales and promotions and uh, how to treat your audience, right? Like making sure there's popcorn or making sure they have a good experience. And so I was borrowing from some of those experiences. When I first started producing, it was blind, honestly, just somewhat brave, but mostly stupidity. I would just go out and pitch my project to potential investors or clients. And that first project that I feel like I really got paid to produce something at a bigger level uh, was because there was a TV network, so there's the buyer, that wanted a series of vignettes about the Lewis and Clark Trail. It was the 200-year anniversary. And we were pitching something else. We were pitching more of a documentary style, verite kind of exploration
Hmm.
of the trail. But the answer was, how about you do a 2-minute vignette every week based on the historical? Here we are 200 years later. So this day in history type of thing.
Right.
So if I could fulfill that order and I get paid. And then in the process, we did a little BTS documentary. By the end of that job, we were probably too tired to make the version we wanted to make. But we were getting paid to make the other version. And I just kept uh, elevating from there or stepping up from there. So I learned from that experience. And then the next few projects I got documentaries, usually corporate videos, a few commercials, while I was always pitching my feature films
Hmm.
or doing a theater production. I was still doing musicals whenever I could. But in the balance of it, I think what I learned about producing, and especially where I'm at now in my career in the last 10 or 15 years, almost exclusively independent films, it is still supply and demand. So if you want to pursue your passion project and you're not sure who the buyer is yet, the sad truth is there might not be one. But when there is a buyer, you can reverse engineer. Do you get to make the film you want? I don't know, but you might get paid to make a film.
Maybe let's jump into kind of the development idea and everything. And I guess to start, maybe if you want to break down like the difference between development and pre-production, because I find, especially in the independent space, a lot of times people are mixing that all together, and it's like, well, this really should have been done in development, and you're just now doing it, in your pre-production and things
Yeah.
like that.
It gets back to that thing I said about these are just creative titles and creative slugs that us filmmakers call something. I've had a lot of friends, and I've done this before too, where we say something like, I've got 7 projects in development, which means we have no money.
Yes.
Sometimes it means I'm still rewriting the script. Or a friend of mine who said, I'm on round 10 of notes. I'm like, who gave you notes? He goes, well, just my own notes and a couple of friends. So not notes from a studio,
Hmm.
not from the investor, but it's good, right? You should be developing. You should be taking the notes. You should be developing your story. So to me, development in the loosest sense is you're developing your story, but there's probably a segue into pre-production that is packaging. Are you developing it and attaching a director, developing it and putting together your pitch deck, your business plan? And that's more development in my opinion. Now, when you're packaging, you're trying to attach talent, cast, etc. Now you're really developing the project, not just the
Hmm.
script. You're developing the business plan. And every film, I always say this, every film is a business. And it's your business. If it's your film, you should run it like a business. So when you're in development, you should be doing the research and development, figuring out the numbers, figuring out the buyers, the players, building that team. It's so important. So to me, that's development. So there's script development, then there's project development, and then to your question about pre-production, I feel like when you're in pre-production, you should be financed. You should have already been casting. You should have storyboards and you should have locations locked, hopefully. And when you're in true pre-production, it's go time. You know what day you start shooting. Um, so to me, but it's a fluid uh, process from
Hmm.
idea to the day where it's on Netflix. A lot of those phases cross over. So you could be in pre-production and still developing. I just shot a film that I wrote in Tulsa, Oklahoma in December. And 2 days before we started filming, I was rewriting something. Part of it was based on location, part budget, part weather. Weather conditions can change.
Hmm.
So as a writer and a producer, I had to put on a couple different hats, but sometimes I just had to be the producer and say, Kirk, get this scene rewritten for the weather, cut 8 to 10 pages for the logistic budget issue, and as a producer, maybe table 2 or 3 days later if we can do pickup shots if we need them, sort of manage the writer's expectations because I'm also the writer and I'm thinking
Hmm.
if I wasn't the writer I'd be saying it more bluntly, so I can't have an ego at this point. I just gotta do the thing that's going to get this film in the can, and I did it, and honestly the script got better because of it. So even up to the day you're shooting, even in editing, you could be rewriting
Hmm.
script. So are you still developing it? And that's why I think these words we use or titles or slugs for to define what we're doing, we could just as well make up some new terms. It's all filmmaking, it's all creative storytelling, it's all uh, a big play.
I've definitely been there with the rewriting. One of my first shorts, we were rewriting a good chunk of that, like after the tech scout and the location scouts, because it's like, yeah, this isn't going to work, and changing it there. And then kind of with that aspect of like you're a lot of times even into post-production, kind of rewriting the script. Like for you, how do you know when a script's developed enough that you can actually start packaging it and trying to finance it versus it still needs work to be ready?
Yeah, I think it's about intent and clarity. So if it is clear to any outside third party objective reader, if it is clear to them what your character's intent is and what the writer's overall intent is of the story, if everything's clear, you should be getting close to ready. Um, Another way of looking at it is, does do we need everything in this? You might have 113 pages and some really good nuggets of character development, but what's necessary for the audience to get the story they need and what clarity do they need? So it's good to have not only objective readers read it, but maybe people who've done it before. The more you've produced a film and gotten feedback, or heaven forbid, negative reviews, and the more you stack up of those, the better you're going to get if you take the note. If you pare it down to what is the intent? What do I want to say about this story? Who are the characters and what do I want people to know about them? And is it clear? Does it make sense? Um, and so I think that's very important. Now, that doesn't mean sometimes you can't get lucky. One of my friends in distribution, I'm going to paraphrase his joke. I've kind of turned it into a log line. But if you have Nick Cage on a motorcycle shooting ghosts, maybe you could get that movie greenlit without a script. I don't know. Like there's some version of maybe there's a way to back into that without as much development. But I think
Hmm.
that's just sort of a big picture genre way of looking at like what is the movie about? But you have about 3 seconds to get someone's attention as they're scrolling through all the options. So
Right.
you do need Nick Cage on a motorcycle shooting ghosts. Like maybe that's what that is in terms of commerce. Now it's up to you whether you're going to make that fantastically interesting and intricate and detailed and some sort of amazing story, or if you're going to stick to the action part of it that perhaps a broader audience would accept maybe. I don't know, but I think what you have to do is get back to why you're doing it. What do you want the world to know about your story and why? And if that's clear on the page and you can get 5 to 10 colleagues to objectively agree with you on that, you might get your movie made.
I like that. The Nick Cage on the motorcycle sometimes helps, and other times it can turn into the like superhero fatigue type thing everybody's always talking about, and things just aren't clicking with audiences anymore.
Yeah, and you know what? I want Nick Cage in one of my next movies, but I'm going to cast him, as a dad pitching horseshoes or something. My creative desire is to find great actors like that and say, "Hey, can I get you something you haven't done before? Like
Hmm.
want to challenge you, and I want to be challenged." And then the sad truth is you go to uh, markets, name whichever foreign market you want to name, and they're looking for, but how about Liam Neeson on a motorcycle shooting ghosts? Like I don't have that movie right now. If I
Hmm.
did, I'd probably be making more money, I guess. But that's another thing. Should we do that for the buyer? Maybe. Yeah, somebody's gonna make that film. Go
Hmm.
best at that. For me, it's always like, what do I want to do for my passion, my vision, and eventually my legacy? What do I want? What are the stories that I want to share with the world?
I guess kind of diving in what you're talking there about how you might, cast somebody in a movie, and then when you try to take it to other markets, that's not what they're looking for. Like when you're developing films, like what questions are you asking to kind of hone and figure out, like, is this going to reach maybe that foreign audience you're hoping to tap into, or that age demographic here in America that you're really trying to hit?
Yeah, if I'm talking to other writers, a lot of times it's writers who are also directing their own script. I try to ask them, who do you see in the lead role? Even if you can't afford them, and even if you don't know if you'll get that actor, who do you see in that role? And then I try to work with them on their log line. And if someone tells me, "Oh, I hate log lines," I'll write that after I'm done. I said, "You should write that before you start page one. You should know what the ending of your movie is and why before you write page one." So I work in terms of development and working with other writers. I try to ask those questions and give as much tough love as I can without poo-pooing their dreams entirely. But it really does boil down to experience, because when you try to take uh, a certain actor that's known for one thing and then squeeze them into something else, you might be missing the mark of what the buyers want. And you might also be missing out on an opportunity to work with someone else who might bring something new to that project. So I try to ask those questions. I log line, Who's your audience? What does your pitch deck look like? What are you pitching this as? Um, and then, yeah, it just gets into a lot more details in terms of just understanding. I want to understand why the writer is doing this, what they care, why do they care about these characters, and really what's going on in their minds, not just what's on the page, because sometimes there's a lot going on in a writer's mind that's not on the page, and the goal is to get it on the page. I had to say to a writer one time, writer director, I said, heaven forbid you were hit by a bus tomorrow and couldn't show up to set, and someone else had to step in and direct it. Would they be able to understand? Right before that, he had said, well, I don't need it to be all on the page because it's all up in my head. When I get on set, I'll just direct it the way I want it. That is the job of a writer, to put what's in your head down on the page. Shakespeare does not have a problem right now with conveying what he meant. It's there.
There's definitely been times I've done that and probably kept a little too much up in my head of like, oh, I can see it, it makes sense to me, and then I don't put it in the script.
I'm guilty of it still because, I'll start writing the dialogue of a character and I know who the character is in my heart.
Mhm.
But then you kind of have to go back and say, wait a minute. How are we going to describe this person? What does he look like? How does he pick up a can of soda? How does he throw it away? Think about what that looks like visually on the screen. I think producing and once in a while having to be the bad cop on a conversation like that has made me a better writer. Um, and when I was just doing that a couple minutes ago with you, I almost felt like I was it was like triggering. I almost felt like I was in that argument again. But I love my artistic friends and I work with people I like. So it's hard
Mhm.
to have those conversations sometimes. So you just try to stay objective and ask the questions. So what did you mean by this? On page 32, where you have your character doing this, what was the intent there? I like to ask questions instead of just say I would do it differently. And so I think that as a producer, sometimes you have to take yourself out of the opinion game and just go with questions because maybe that writer, like you said, maybe it's in your head somewhere, and having that conversation helps you get it on the page a little more clear. And if you're not the director, now your director is going to have questions.
Mhm. I'd be curious to hear like what are some of your favorite questions then to ask to help be objective and pull some of that information out.
I'll try usually to do a specific thing, like I mentioned, like, hey, on page 32, you have your character doing X, Y, Z. How does that advance the story? Or what about that do you want people to remember that helps us turn the page into Act Two? And I feel like it's a way to allow the writer to explain what they're going for. And it's not necessarily my favorite question, but I like to get into that. But some of my favorite questions have my acting background. I care about characters and I like character development and I like quirky, odd characters and I like finding out what their reasons are. So sometimes I'll play hypothetical games with the writer and say, okay, if there was a sequel to this movie, or if there was just an adjacent movie in the same world, but this character wasn't the lead actor, what if this character was the sixth biggest character in a different movie? What would be their interests in life? What are their hobbies? How did they grow up? Like, tell me more about who this character is. Are they on a bowling team? Do they still daydream about their high school glory days as a football player? Like who are they? So when I ask that question, you should know that answer. The answer should not be, well, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it does, because even if we're not talking about their backstory, if the writer knows it, it's gonna, and they can infuse it into the story they're telling us, I think you're gonna have a richer character, something more with more depth. And I think that will draw an audience in. So I like to ask those questions, but it gets philosophical and hypothetical a lot of times. And honestly, working with writers, including myself, a lot of times it's like therapy. Tears will be involved.
Yeah, no, I've had a few of those when I wrote scripts, and I just had to walk away like and cool off for a bit and then think about it and be like, yeah, what they said is completely right, and I need to work on that or change that
Yeah,
or whatever.
in our last film, it's called Where You Were When.
Okay.
We were shooting in Tulsa, as I mentioned earlier, and to cut 10 to 12 pages and save some money and time and logistics, they're just the most obvious cut was the cut that we'd been talking about for months, which was cut these two parents out of the movie entirely. There's a the, the movie takes place in a high school, and one kid skips school that day. She's playing hooky, and in the script I wrote for many years, I had these parents in the movie, and they show up, and it's a lot of world building. It's a poorer neighborhood, and it's she lives in a trailer, and it's a little run down, and I wanted to see her world. And I wanted the impact of her dad and her mom catching her playing hooky on the morning of 9/11. So they come home and they see her like, "What are you doing at home?" And she goes, "Look what's on the news." And she's and the dad was gonna do give her a little story about where he was the day Reagan was shot, and talking about some of the mistakes he made in his life, and he wanted to stop the cycle.
Hmm.
Right? He taught her this. She learned a bad habit from him. So he wants this. I wanted that character to have the moment with the parents where she's busted, but she's also remorseful and recognizing that she is has a chance to have a different life than her parents did.
Right.
But from the executive producers to the other actors and the director, even I sort of agreed we didn't fully need it, but financially, we could not build out an interior of a trailer home at and that fast. We just didn't have time to build it out. And so we cut the mom and the dad and the sister out of the movie. And I was going to play the dad role, honestly. And maybe that was part of my ego, like holding on to that scene so I could tell her, don't be like me. You have a chance to be better. And there was an impact to that. But in the rewrites, we honed in on what the main character really, how she's going to react when she discovers this. And we came up with a different way to get the same impact without the parents in the scene and without having to build a trailer home interior, which might have been, I don't know, 30 grand for half a day of shooting. It just didn't make sense.
Right.
And so I think the movie got better because of that. And so you do have to sometimes think like a producer and be objective. And I think when a writer is challenged with that, you, you're honestly going to become a better writer
Hmm.
when you can learn to pivot and it goes back to the intent. What is the intent? What does the character want? What do they need? And is it clear? And is it going to be clear to the audience?
There's a lot more we could dive into there, but I also want to touch a little bit on the pitch deck side of things here before we wrap up the episode, just because that's such a big part of developing and getting a film off the ground. Um, so to start, I'd love to like hear what are like some of the common mistakes you see producers make when putting together their pitch decks?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of mistakes that producers make when putting together pitch decks. In no particular order, I think when you're comparing your movie to other movies, you have to be careful. While thematically or creatively they might be similar in tone or story, if your movie is being made independently for 300 grand and you're comparing it to a Sony released film for 40 million, there's just no comparison to begin with.
Hmm.
Uh, Plus, it sets up unrealistic expectations for investors or other people who just maybe aren't as familiar with it. So I think you have to be careful. You could compare it. You could say story-wise, it's similar to this huge movie. But I think you also need to be aware that maybe comparisons closer to what your story is at this budget are more honest, and maybe an investor or other third parties looking at your pitch deck will appreciate that honesty. Another mistake I see is when they talk about ROI. I'm going to make up a number here, but I think it's like 80 or 90% of the time. If I'm looking at a pitch deck from a first-time filmmaker, they will say, but what if it's the next Blair Witch Project? Or what if it's the next Napoleon Dynamite? And they'll put in numbers that are not real. They found these numbers. Oftentimes they find these numbers out there somewhere. Like let's say they'll quote that this made 40 million in box office, but it was made for 1 million. And they'll say that movie made 40x. No, that's false. That's not how it works. 40 million box office, you have to assume 60 or 70% of that stayed with each one of those individual theaters. So let's knock that down to about 15 million. Now you got to assume some sales commissions and distribution fees and other fees. Now let's knock that down to 10 million. Now you got to pay back your investors. And now let's somehow get this number down to a realistic number that you cannot find on the internet. There's almost no way you're going to be able to Google that number. So don't put that in your pitch deck. Don't even, doesn't mean you can't get lucky and fool someone, but the real ROI to the investors of that film might be one or two or three X at the most. But you don't know. So don't put numbers in there that unless you know what they are. So a more realistic number on projections might come from a reputable sales agent who's already signed on to your project to provide you estimates. I think that's what investors would appreciate. And if you don't have that, just say so. But what I would avoid is putting in fake numbers or assumed numbers that you Googled. Uh, there's other challenges with pitch decks that I see a lot of times. Maybe it's just cosmetic. I mean, I wouldn't probably use AI at this point for the entire deck. I mean, fine if you need a mock-up poster concept, fine, but maybe the verbiage and the story and the pitch itself should be from your heart, right? Tell us what you're why you're doing this. And the other thing is, and I could go on about pitch decks, but there should be part of it is pitching why you think this is suitable for an audience, why you think you have an audience, and why you care about the project. So I avoid putting entire synopses in a pitch deck. Put Pare it down to half a page and make it clever. It doesn't have to be. And tell the story from beginning to end. By the way, I don't want a cliffhanger in a pitch deck. I want to know what happened because I might never read the script. And if you're pitching to other producers or executive producers who can greenlight your movie, don't make them read the script. Make them want it based on the pitch deck. Tell us what happens at the end. Don't do a dot, dot, dot to be continued, or now you have to read the script to find out what happened. This is just your entire movie in a 3 to 7 page visual heavy deck. That's what it should be. And then the business side of it. And you could do a separate pitch deck that's just the business and the numbers and all that. But again, I would avoid doing that yourself. I say in the book that I wrote, just don't do your own root canals just because you're the one paying for it. Maybe hire someone. I see this on LinkedIn a lot too. There's this sort of taboo about hiring a producer. And I don't know. I've been hired many times, and sure, there's some bad ones out there, but I think if you truly believe in your product and you truly believe in the team building, you're gonna pay your DP and your editor and your caterer and your actors. If you are a writer director who's trying to produce something on your own for the first time, maybe hire a team, maybe hire a producer or two that can help you build that pitch deck and business plan and set up the LLC and treat your film like a business. And so now that's an answer to your what are some of the challenges with pitch decks? It's 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 things like that where you say, here's my producing team, and I look at the pitch deck and I see a UPM and a writer and a director with no producing credits as listed as producers. And I say that if no one on this team has experience in sales, distribution, and putting together a CAM account for revenue sharing or any of that, then you still have to build your team some more.
Mm.
So sometimes if that's the case, focus on the creative and just pitch your story and don't put in any comps, don't put any ROI projections that you Googled. Just stick to your story and be humble and come in with the hey, we'd love for you to join our team. Build that team out. And the pitch deck should always be evolving when you add more to it. And be careful not to just splash it around. Never send it unsolicited to someone. And there's a lot of we could do a pitch deck episode later.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so one other topic I wanted to dive into with the pitch deck, which you mentioned this in your book, but it's only something very recently I've started even seeing many people talk about, but is the aspect of getting legal to review and sign off on your pitch deck. So maybe just dive a little bit into why that's important and helpful.
Yeah, you just want to be careful that you're not misleading people. What if an investor came back to you later after your movie is in two really cool little film festivals, but it doesn't sell and it doesn't make a single penny back? And the investor says, you told me this was going to be the next Napoleon Dynamite and that I was going to make 40x on my money. Now, you could argue, no, 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 I just said what if it's the next Napoleon Dynamite, but that could be misunderstood, misleading, and you know, people can sue for whatever reason they want. So you just kind of, it'd be good to have legal counsel look at your pitch deck and say, are we representing this project in the most honest way possible? And do you see any red flags with that? And it goes beyond the pitch deck. I think having a lawyer and more experienced producers on board earlier in your process is going to help you have a more efficient and professional run film anyway. And I think that's what we all want. But when filmmakers start with no money, there's always that, well, but we don't have the money. Well, then maybe you're not ready. That's just the truth of it. Maybe you need to shoot a short film or something else. So that's kind of a medium size answer to the legal thing. I don't worry too much about the pitch deck phase if you can't afford a lawyer. But that's why I say then use common sense and make sure the pitch deck doesn't overpromise and underdeliver.
As a producer, you always want to underpromise and overdeliver.
Yep.
Starting to kind of wrap things up, I wanted to just give you an opportunity to kind of plug your book,
Mm.
Greenlight Yourself, and share a little bit about that and where people can go to find it.
Yeah, thank you. It's called Greenlight Yourself, the Street Smart Guide to the Indie Film Biz. We changed that subtitle a few times. Um, I got coerced into writing this with my business partner, Roger Lindley. And we have these conversations all the time, every day. We have a conversation that belongs in one of the chapters of this book. So Roger said, "Why don't we just write it all down?" And it's kind of like a great opportunity to dive into examples. a lot of it is we learn the hard way. So don't be afraid to admit that you failed a few times. And I think it's Denzel Washington that said, if you're going to fail, fail forward. Something like that. And I heard another one about falling up. And so I used that in my last screenplay. This character fell up into a few jobs. The book is a lot about the process from A to Z. And if you're gonna do it yourself, uh, hire the right people. No one starts a business like, let's say it was donuts, and they came up with a great recipe, and then they do everything themselves. No, they hire people. And that's how they become successful. But learn from your failures and learn every aspect of film, from financing to gaffing. Let be learn what if you didn't go to film school, you could still make a film
Mhm.
on your own. But that's what the book covers is like if you're going to do this, read this first. Because there's a lot of things my partner and I, Roger, have learned the hard way over the last 30 years. We've had those experiences where uh, you're on day 13 and you might get shut down because a permit is closing at 12 p.m. and it's 12:01 and what do you do? Or we've had the experience of making a film and running out of money and putting it into festivals and then still not being able to deliver for whatever reason. So there's multiple chapters in here, and we cover everything from marketing to team building and development and pitch decks. So that's Greenlight Yourself. It's a lot of personal experiences with mostly the names changed to protect our friends who we hope can have a laugh at themselves as well. There's a sense of humor in the book.
Mhm.
We're not solving the world's problems here. We're not brain surgeons. We're not Peace Corps workers. We're not really even teachers. I mean, those are all noble jobs. We're entertainers. And so it's good to have a laugh at yourself. It's good to learn from your mistakes. And then if you want a career in filmmaking, it's good to keep moving forward. You have a chance to get up and do it again. If you fail on your first movie and you have a chance to get up and do it again, you might be successful because that is mostly what it takes.
I've had a few of those, and I definitely have seen some friends that, yeah, they made a film and something went wrong, but they got back up and now they're still in the industry, still doing some really cool stuff.
Yep.
So then this next question, I'll kind of let you take whatever angle you want to take with it. Um, but obviously working in the film industry is crazy between the long hours and all that type of stuff. So how do you go about leading like a healthy lifestyle while working this industry?
Oh my gosh. Um, Everything from meditation to prayer to exercise to fantasy football. Distract yourself with some other stuff. Have a life. Have a family. Go on a walk with your favorite person. Um, Take a road trip by yourself uh, and journal and just it's a constant uh, it's a constant humbling yourself in the process and don't take yourself too serious. But there's a lot of anxiety in this industry. I've heard it compared to professional sports or something like that. Pick whichever one you want, from UFC fighting to Major League Baseball. But not everyone's going to get the $40 million contract. And there's no shame in being the best minor league coach ever. And so I think when you realize that you're chasing something that just is sort of a dream, it's probably good to remind yourself that there are real things in life too. I had a 2 hour phone call with my 24-year-old daughter the other day, and we talked about some real stuff. I mean, family stuff and her being finishing university and my looking for a new house. And we were just talking about all the life stuff,
Hmm.
some past tragedies that we're still talking about, but it was connecting. Same thing. What I do for myself is on my calendar, I put things like I'm going to do a podcast with Micah, and then I'm going to do a business call with my business partner, and then I'm going to talk to a new client, and then I'm going to take a walk, and then I'm going to watch an episode of Love is Blind to completely erase all reality from my brain for a minute. And I put things like I put get some ice cream on my schedule just to remind myself that there are some human things to do as well that help us stay balanced.
I like that. I especially the calendar part, like because I think it's so easy to just like your calendar is just for all the work meetings and things you need to
Right.
not forget and to go put some fun stuff on there as a reminders is a great thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I started doing that a few years ago and it works for me. Otherwise, I forget and my family will remind me like all you talk about is that yeah, because you're so into it. You have to separate yourself. I wonder, does a brain surgeon go home and just talk about brain surgery all day? Probably not. I think they leave it at work. And I know a
Hmm.
lot of people that can leave it at work and they go home and that they have a different thing. And for me, I work from home
Yeah.
and my hobby is also my career. So when I'm in between jobs, I'm writing something that I might just want to do for fun. I just never stop being creative. And when I do, I got, find a different hobby. So I really love fantasy football. I play a little poker once in a while, and I go on hikes. But those are the things that take me out of the world, and I find them equally interesting when I'm doing them. I just have to, like you said, I gotta schedule a bowl of ice cream or schedule a call with my nephew, and I think we should try our best to be a little more spontaneous once in a while as well.
Hmm.
But that's how I remind myself you need to take a breather once in a while, and you need to, call your grandma.
So then, final question for you here is just what is one piece of advice you would give to somebody who's just getting started producing?
Get a mentor, be a mentor, uh, understand why you want to do it, uh, set your goals and keep achieving them day by day, but maybe set your expectations as well. Not everything has to be accomplished overnight. And I think in terms of practical or logistics, someone asked me recently if they could learn producing by coming on our set to be a PA. And I said, I mean, maybe, but are you really going to learn producing or are you going to learn production?
Hmm.
There's two different things. And so, uh, try to understand all the variables of producing, starting with the end game, starting with how are we going to make our money at this and how am I going to make money at this? I think that's important to understand versus a lot of producers who want to make something and they want to run the production crew. And that's really cool too. But I think my advice is to understand the business side and the creative side and try to understand every single person's job on that set so that you can answer you need to be able to answer the questions when they're asked, and that's the producer's job is to know a little bit of everything that's going on in that film, and you're the one that's going to carry it to the finish line. So ask yourself, is this what I really want to do?
It's true. You got to ask yourself that question and be honest too, because it's a hard job to do.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's fun, it's exciting. I am glad that I'm still in the game and I'm not gonna quit now. I'm
Hmm.
still gonna be doing this if I get to be 80 years old. I'll still be making things
Hmm.
and film and TV and memories.
Nice. All right. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this episode of the show. But thank you once again, Kirk, for coming on to the Producer Podcast.
Thank you so much.
And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Producer Podcast and jump back into developing more exciting episodes of the show. Make sure to join us again next week for another new episode of the show as season 11 continues. Until then, make sure to follow the Producer Podcast on social media, and thanks for listening.